Here they are. Welcome back. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Hey, Kate. Hi, Miriam. Good to see you. We've had a little bit of chaos, which Miriam knows about. Kate, I don't know whether you know about. We had a couple of different times. So this is Presence Forum, 2.0. We had a really lovely gathering a little while ago that Miriam was part of, and we're back now with our wonderful guests. So thank you for joining us very, very much.
What have we learned from that, Michelle?
What have we learned from that? Don't trust that the invitation you're sent is the right invitation, and that there is always possibility in chaos.
Oh, I was more curious when everyone got together 2 hours ago.
Sorry.
What you learned from that?
I'll let other people speak who were with us 2 hours ago.
Well, I'm asking you.
Oh, what have I learned? I learned that even half an hour totally unplanned can be wonderful, and it was lovely. It was a lovely session. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Does it happen often in Never Done Before that we have unplanned session with unplanned guests?
With uninvited guests that don't go.
That could actually be a format.
I can share 2 incidences. One where the host actually didn't show up and we're planning a party, and it was supposed to be on his Zoom. And I already had a few drinks and actually didn't plan to show up. And there I was hosting a online party workshop, half drunk, in a Zoom space for which I didn't have any facilitation rights. So I couldn't even share music. So we had a silent disco. That was interesting. And the other Never Done Before incidents was the host showing up 20 minutes late. That was also interesting. And today we had one without host and only guests, and now we have a perfect forum. So yeah, everyone welcoming our guest and Michelle, our host.
Yeah.
For some presents.
I think we should start. So very, very welcome to everybody for this session that is slightly different and still wonderful. For those of you who haven't been part of a forum before, the Seedlings forums have been running every month as a complement to our workshop process, where we invite guests, and I'll do a little drum roll, Lily and Oscar, to share their presence. Yeah, there we are. Thank you. To share their learnings on the topic, which of course today is presence. And so when we sat to plan this session, we talked a little bit about how we thought it would be nice to introduce the session with a question around presence. And the question that we come up with is, how are you showing up? How is your presence present with us today? So let's open our session with everybody introducing themselves. How is it that your presence is showing up today?
Hi. So I'm Kate. Hi. My presence is about moving toward focus again, because I just came off of having some friends in town and it was a very intense visit and very personal and lovely. And so now this is my dipping my toes back into facilitation land. So that's my presence.
So I'm Mirjam, I'm in Amsterdam, and currently my presence is with the question, how do I want to live my life right now, today?
I can go on. I feel my presence is warm and on a temperature scale because it is very warm in my room. So I feel my body is a bit tired, but still present, and my mind is very focused and very grateful to be here.
And I'm checking in after a 9-year-old granddaughter's birthday party, and I feel like very, very fizzy Coca-Cola, and bring lots of energy across from mostly girls who were screaming at each other after they loaded up with sugar from the birthday cake, and then were demanded ice cream. So those two sugar combinations definitely created a very, very interesting experience for the parents who were picking up the grandchildren. For me, my role was cleaning up the wrapping on the paper, making sure that we left the venue in the same state we got it in. And I think that's exactly like facilitation.
And I am present with curiosity of what there is to emerge, learning with and from, and yeah, excited to have Oscar, Lily, and Michelle, 3 previous podcast guests. And we all touched upon the topic of presence and listening and authenticity in our conversations. So having this now combined in one space, there can be only magic and inspiration emerging from that.
Well, I am present with some playfulness after what we've experienced in the last couple of hours. I feel like the corks popped there, so there maybe that's the effervescence of the Coca-Cola too. Let's go. A sense of playfulness and also a sense of gratitude for both the Seedlings program as a whole, but also for this particular session and gathering of people. I'm really excited about the conversation. When we were picking guests for each of these different forums, in fact, Oscar and Lily, I think we locked you in as some of the first, knowing your emphasis on the being aspect of facilitation. So I'm really grateful that you have agreed to be part of the conversation. The way that we shape these sessions is it's a conversation, as I said. We've thought through some questions that we're going to explore. And then we like to have some pause points where we can open it up and have everybody participate, ponder, be curious, whatever it is that, that you would like to do to explore the topic in your own way. So we've got some clusters of questions and then some pause points. And so I guess the invitation is for some listening and then some participation as part of the flow over the next hour and a half or so. One of the things that we have explored in each of these sessions is to get to know a little bit more about the journey of the different facilitators who are part of the Never Done Before community. And Lily and Oscar, I think that applies to you as well. There's a real curiosity about your journey to facilitation. What brought you to call yourself a facilitator? And when did you decide you were a facilitator? So we've got France and Australia. And maybe Lily, would you be happy to start? I'll let Oscar's sugar settle. Would you be happy to start, Lily?
Sure, I will be the crisps and appetizers, whether that happened in the birthday or or not. So I'm Lily. I'm 31 years old, and I started my journey as a facilitator without knowing that I was doing facilitation, and this is a common point I see in many facilitators. And I started in an NGO where we worked with young social entrepreneurs, so the seedlings of social enterprise and of how can we change the world through common projects and common enterprise. And we did many workshops, many seminars for groups of 2 or 3 students to groups of 200, 300 students. And this is where I started. And I think the beginning of my journey was something that was very enthusiasm oriented. So we had to get people motivated, students excited about doing their projects, about going forth in their projects, and also this idea of helping them see the impact that they could have in their territories. And I think I developed that my facilitation style as something that was very action oriented. So let's do a project, let's change the world, let's move. And a few years after, I think I was a bit tired of doing a lot and always orienting my facilitation on action. And I started calling myself a facilitator, I think maybe 5 years ago, when a colleague of mine I was still inside this company. She got trained in facilitation, and she started bringing all of these new questions inside the organization. Why are we doing this workshop? What's the objective? What's the intention? Why this? Why that? What's the purpose? And I really liked it. And she mentored me and a lot of other people in the organization. And since then, I've been calling myself a facilitator. And now I've been freelancing for the last 3 years and exploring how we facilitate with the mind. So still keeping this idea of action orientation and doing projects, but also how can we facilitate with the heart, with emotions, and with the body, not so that we are not always doing and creating things, but also having this space to be and to be in relationship with oneself, with the others, and the planet and nature.
Wow, thank you. Oscar.
Well, the good news and the bad news is I don't call myself a facilitator. I think we need to be careful with the identities we adopt and what those identities mean for us and for others. If somebody wants to buy my services and they have to put it on a budget line called facilitation, yeah, knock yourself out. But I think facilitation is a state of mind. You're facilitating an outcome for a group of people, with a group of people, and serving a group of people who are outside the context in which the workshop takes place, the change takes place that you're helping to facilitate. So for me, I've been the victim of many poor facilitators who, the crazy person with, has to write down everything with their magic marker all the time and trying to create an energy that matches theirs rather than meeting the group where it's at, noticing what is present in the room, and then helping the group to notice what progress means in that moment. I think for me, I've equally been gifted many great facilitators as well. And I think for me, one of the interesting times was we'd invested an enormous amount of time in a very big change that I was doing while I was in a corporate role. And we had 14,000 organizations representing over 300,000 employees that we were going to impact with the change that we were going to do with the technology we were rolling out. And the facilitator took me aside at the break and said, there is absolutely no way we're going to get to the agenda outcomes that your group has agreed to in this room in the first session. I said, great, Alan, no problem. What do you suggest we do? He goes, oh, well, that wasn't the response I was anticipating. I was expecting you to get really angry and drive the agenda. Or I said, well, if we're here to facilitate what's in the room right now, what are you noticing? And what can we achieve in the time remaining? Because I don't think both of us can answer that question. The answer's in the room. And he just gave me a hug and he said, you should be a facilitator. And I said, I've got 14,000 organizations. I've got to roll this change out. If facilitation is how I'm going to get there, Alan, I'm really grateful. But this group of people, which was 80 people in the room at the time, we're in this big hotel. These people are trusting your process, and I'm trusting your process. So let's just trust your process and get through it. And Alan had the courage to tell me the truth at the break. And I learned a valuable lesson about facilitation in that moment, to have the courage, have the presence, have the conviction to take the host, the sponsor, whatever phrase you want to use, aside and say, we need to change. And I think for me, in that moment where I saw Alan ask those questions, I saw great facilitation in action.
It's interesting, isn't it, that and Lily, you talked about the being aspect, and you both referred to that. The notion of our being, of our presence, of how we show up, being as, if not more important than what we actually do. And I think it's been really interesting to finish the Seedlings program with this topic, because the other topics have been very much more about the mechanisms of workshops and planning and participation and things. So I'm really interested, from your point of view, how does that balance show up for you between the being and the doing? What degree of emphasis do you put on those different aspects of your work with groups? I won't even use the term facilitation. Here you go, Oscar, your work with groups.
For me, it's a big question, and I think the answer changes all of the time, depending on the group, depending on the agenda, depending on how the session is going. I think it also changes on whether I'm co-facilitating or I'm facilitating alone. I feel that when I'm facilitating alone, I tend to shift between roles. So I will be, at one point, I will be very focused on the agenda, on what we're doing and driving the group. And I will have these mini moments where I stop, take a break, pause, and turn my senses back on. It's like maybe Oscar, you have another way of doing with groups, but I feel like when I'm very focused on a specific activity, I do not have all of the other senses opened up at 100%. I might feel or sense other things that are happening in the group, but I feel like I cannot both at the same time be very focused on the work that I'm doing and be 100% present on the other topics. And one thing that really helps me navigate between those two polarities, I don't think it's two different things, but it's rather polarities and ands rather than ors. And what really helps me is taking breaks and having discussion partners, like what you were saying with Alan, Oscar, having people that I can refer to and help me shift from one polarity to another.
Lily, how does that play out differently face-to-face versus via video and online?
It's a great question. I feel when I'm in the same room as people, as I can sense more things. I can sense the body languages of people. I will see their legs. I can see, you know, the mini movements of what's happening in the inside the body of people. I can see also the interactions between people that and that is quite hard to see it online. People cannot look in the eyes of each other and, you know, have all of these strange little mimics and jokes and things. And I feel I can sense more when I'm in person, and at the same time it's very easy to sense also in a digital context whether people are here or not. You can see, you know, the eyes going from left to right and people opening other tabs and things. So it's different senses for me are activated. I don't know if that answers your question, Oscar.
Doesn't need to be an answer. I guess just to raise everyone's consciousness that whether it's face-to-face or virtual, your consciousness as the person in the room hosting, leading, facilitating. One thing I am very deliberate about whenever I'm inviting conversation, whether that's face-to-face or I mimic this in my mind virtually, when I'm in a room and the group is in some formation, I'm very deliberate to not be in the line of conversation. So I'm always outside the line of conversation, almost out of sight. And sometimes I feel like the sheepdog around the outside of sheep, because people will naturally kind of try and articulate something to me, and I'll always say, please address the group because I'm not going to be here tomorrow. And being conscious to sense that my presence is required, but not my body in between the conversation, and be very, very, very conscious of that. And although you can't mimic it in a video sense, I do adopt that mindset that I never go into a breakout group, because in a virtual context, hosts will often say to me, oh, Oscar, please go into this group because we've got a recalcitrant executive, or, you know, you'd be good for them. And I'd go, for what purpose? Because that intervention is all about you and it's not about the group. So I think reminding myself consistently and having the consciousness to go, I'm facilitating a system, I'm not facilitating the current dialogue, is one of the things that helps me become present to what's happened, what's emerging, and what's useful for the group. I think one of the things I'm always conscious of with hosts is they don't do enough of what I would call the funeral exercise at the beginning of any change, where they acknowledge what's got them to this point, be grateful for it, allow the group to mourn what they've got up to now before they change. And to me, it's always fascinating, the groups where I provide that invitation to all groups to, I don't call it the funeral exercise for them. I say, you need to acknowledge what's got us here today. And we also need to agree what we're going to leave behind and what we're going to take forward. And I can almost guess sometimes the groups that will take it up wholeheartedly and bring all of their baggage to the conversation, all of the stuff that is holding them back. And then it's equally interesting with the groups that want to go forward, but not acknowledge what could possibly be holding them back. And I think often it's the sensing you do. For me, it's with my body. It's not hearing, it's not seeing, it's just a sense. And for the last 3 years, I've tried to tune myself not to go, it can't be done on video, but how do I adapt my presence to video in that regard? So that, Lily, that's why I was curious to ask you that question. Maybe as a skilled practitioner, you could provide another perspective for me as opposed to a correct answer.
Can I jump in there, because I think you've both talked about what you've learned from others, and you both mentioned people who have sort of supported you to deepen your practice. I'm really interested in that notion that, you know, we train facilitators in all sorts of tools and techniques, and then people walk away with this kit bag of stuff to do. And yet this notion of how we show up, how we are present, who we are when we're in the room, is way less tangible and more challenging to get people into, you know, to work with. How do we cultivate our being? How do we cultivate our presence so that that is an equal, if not even stronger part of our facilitation toolkit than the techniques and, you know, the processes and the things that we use? So how do we cultivate being, presence?
So Lily, I'm sensing you want me to go first this time.
I sense your body is more engaged towards speaking first.
There's probably a couple of things for me. Number one, no, it's my body. As it's not just my mind. So it means I have to sleep. I need to be hydrated. I need to be fully relaxed and available to the group. I'll draw an interesting parallel. In 2 weeks' time, I have to read my third book as an audio book, and I'm using a producer that's done many of these, and they're overseas. And I said, look, I'm available from 6 a.m. to read. So I literally read into a mic, and they're there listening to you as the audience here. What Stephen said to me was, I can't have you at 6 a.m. It takes 2 full hours for your vocal cords to warm up, Oscar. 8 o'clock's the earliest I will see you. It's the earliest I will hear you. It's the earliest I'll record, because he was treating my body as a complete system. And in my head, I do podcast interviews at 4 a.m. Sydney time to New York. No problem. I do workshops to Colorado at 1 a.m. in the morning. Why should this be any different? But it was Stephen pointing out to me and saying, I love your enthusiasm, but we have to do 8 sessions of 2 hours each, and I need to look after your whole body, including your vocal cords, Oscar. So let's listen to our body. So won't be uncommon for me to make sure that whatever the workshop is, I have a complete 8 hours of sleep. Now, is this possible all the time? No, but it's my mindset, because if I'm in service of the group, I need to be as present and aware as possible. And there's always water present. And for me, it's a state of mind about, I can't listen with all my senses. I can't be available to the group with all my senses, whether it's video or face-to-face, unless I've slept, unless I hydrate, and unless I eat properly. Now, the good news and the bad news is I've never smoked, I've never drunk alcohol, and I'm a vegetarian. So, you know, my lifestyle choices kind of limit the craziness to a 9-year-old's granddaughter's birthday party and lots of sugar. That's about as close as I'll get to the edge of, you know, my body. So it's about, for me, it's about my body and making sure that I'm present in my body. I remember interviewing Eric Arsenault, who's a one of the top voice coaches in the United States for the TV program The Voice, and I interviewed him about the fact that your voice is often the signal to your presence. But he said most people are in their body, but they either don't know how to use it or they abuse it. And he said there's a very small part of the world, that's about 5%, that respects their body and their body respects them, and they're able to be fully present to amazing connections. And in that context, it was about the singing, the music, and the audience all coming together. But for me, it's my body.
Oh, Lily, I just want to thank you. It reminds me, Oscar, of we used to, and I still sometimes do, talk about grounding ourselves. People familiar with that term of actually, and that is about making sure that you are fully in your body and that you haven't left your thinking brain in the car because you couldn't get a car park, or, you know, all the things that can go on that disconnect us from that sense of being grounded. So that's also, I think that's a really interesting reminder about presence being about being fully actually, you know, embodied. Thank you. Lily, what's your take on how we cultivate being?
Many things are similar to what Oscar, who has disappeared in the dark, just shared. And one very practical thing for me is getting better at knowing myself and what helps me be present and what gets me out of my presence. So for instance, I've noticed that if I take the traditional French breakfast that they do in Facilitation, which is very greasy, very chocolatey, very sugary, then an hour after I am not there at all. I am hungry, I'm not focused at all. So I pay a lot of attention to what I eat. And I have this rule of no sugar before 4 in the afternoon when I facilitate, and no desserts, because if I do this, I know my body will switch at one point and that it will be very hard for me to focus back. And one thing that also really helps me is taking care of the transitions. So taking care of how I get to the venue, of sleeping the night before at the venue if I can, just to have this transition between I'm at home, I have my daily life, my all of my daily preoccupations, and then I start to shift into I'm here to be totally present with the group, and shifting spaces really helps. And when I do this at home is having this invitation for myself to, when I do a workshop at home, have 15 minutes, well, come into the room 15 minutes before and know that my dog is taken care of, that no one will come and interrupt me in the room, that I have some water, that my space is as clean as I can have it, and that I have had the chance to stretch, to maybe dance to music, to get into my body, and that everything that I needed taken care of is taken care of before. So if that means sometimes that I have to wake up a bit earlier than what I had in mind so that I can evacuate what's in my mind, that will really help me. And another thing that's been helping me in the last years is being more mindful of my defense system and all of these little signals that my body starts lighting up to show me that I'm getting defensive. For example, when I become suddenly very tired, it's that a defense is being activated. So I've started being more mindful of these and starting to observe myself to what are all of these little signals. And then I know when this behavior is happening, I know it's a defense. I know I'm not present anymore. And then I'm starting to tell myself some stories about what's happening in the workshop rather than listening to what's really happening.
You remind me of this notion of you know, a power of self-observation. So as well as being in our own bodies, we're also observing ourselves, you know, and it's that kind of bearing witness. I don't know whether people have heard that term, but we're in ourselves. So the embodiment that Oscar's talking about, and then that power of bearing witness to ourselves as well, and being able to have both of those lenses at the same time. Yeah. Sorry.
And maybe just a point on that, for me, that observation role is very tricky, because it can shift into the narrator who tells a lot of stories and starts judging or telling a narrative of what's actually happening, and this is where I try to observe just on a bodily level, what's in my body, what's happening in my body, rather than what do I think is happening right now, which can be very interesting, but that can disconnect me from what's really happening.
Wow. Thank you. I'm wondering how this is landing for other people, this conversation about cultivating presence. How is it landing for you? What questions are coming up, ponderings, curiosities?
Miriam with a J. This reminds me of some things that we've spoken about with regard to movement and improv. And when we were talking about, you know, how do we cultivate our presence? Yeah, Lily, you're totally right. It's so easy to slip beyond observation into judgment, and it happens so fast. So that's still working on that. One thing that I and Michelle and I have talked about this too, is with regard to when we do get triggered by something, I do try to do the sort of presence awareness that I preach in a workshop for myself, if I can sneak in just a moment of it when I'm facilitating something, to get myself grounded and then back in the space again. And part of that is the physical aspect of things. So being aware of what's in my body, but then also if I can turn that energy into something physical in a workshop, offline especially, but then also online, it gets me back into my body. And then ideally, if I can invite people into a movement as well, then I feel like that's a way to get everybody back in this sort of presence of mind and in the moment. So that's something that I've been working on, and sometimes it works better than others, depending on what energy I put into the room, often. But yeah, that's how it lands with me. Very well, very relevant.
To me, it's making a lot of sense indeed, also from the improvisation and the dance perspective. I think my challenge would be to create space for it, to, you know, grant myself the space to reconnect to myself in case I get triggered or disconnected somehow. So I'm wondering, like Kate says, like maybe inviting to a movement, something, what approaches are to do this in a sort of a natural way, creating the space for that.
Thoughts on that, Oscar, Lily? Thoughts on creating that space for re-centering, refocusing?
Do you have something that pops up in your mind, Oscar, or in your body?
I would say, for me, my consistent practice is to ensure the group has an opportunity to reflect on not what they've got as an outcome within a specific subset of the agenda, but ask them to reflect on how they had that dialogue. So they will talk about how they were dialoguing, what they discussed, what they didn't discuss, what was present, what was absent. And I do this so I can just let them go so I can get to that point of noticing myself, to create the space for me in that moment. Because whether we like the label or not, we are performing for the group. We are bringing our human energy to a performance that is a unique combination of people in place and space and time. And for me, if I don't have those commercial breaks, for me, I can't help them. So I'm very deliberate that maximum every 45 minutes within a day workshop. And if it's a 2-hour workshop, I'll ask this question at least twice. What did you notice about how this conversation just took place? So for me, that just creates space for me then to go, okay. And I can notice what they noticed as well, but I'm not there. I'm back a little bit further while they're in the dialogue, not about their content, but about how they're having the conversation.
Mm.
So that's how I create the space for me to get a bit of a commercial break, to get often I visualize it as just plugging the charger into a phone and just recharging the batteries for a short period of time.
Miriam, I think this reminds me of, we spoke earlier today about silence and breath too. And it's reminding me of how we use those, the kind of pause point that you're talking about, Oscar, a pause point with the group, and also support them to experience their own embodiment. There can be a lot of busyness, a lot of doing, a lot of work happening. And how do we actually ground that for the group as well? I don't know whether you wanted to bring up your little comment earlier on about silence.
And as another way to see it also, because I really do love silence, and I also find that at moments the group might need to just have a 15-minute conversation where they talk about what they want to talk, and just let their energy flow, and not, because I've been, and I find this very funny in many retreats, there's this kind of atmosphere of always being very dignified, and always, when there's a bit too much of emotion, let's ring a bell and center ourselves and ground ourselves. And it works very well in retreats, but sometimes in corporate settings, people just want to talk, and people just want to engage in conversations. And sometimes I find it useful, like we were discussing, how do you deal with this with kids? Sometimes it might be 5 minutes of just running around like crazy and yelling like crazy, and then the energy can go down, and then we can recenter and reground the group. And I really try to listen to what the group really needs at that moment, and do I want to guide a grounding exercise because I need to feel grounded, and I need to have silence, and I need this break? Or is it something that the group really doesn't need? And then how can I design so that both I have my break times, like Oscar, you were saying, and also how can the group explore their level of energy at that point? And I know the times where I've made errors is that I'm not listening to the level of energy, and I'm bringing a very different polarity and energy that the group doesn't need at that moment, and there's no transition whatsoever in between, and then the group doesn't understand what's happening. And I would be curious to, if I may ask you, Oscar, to your opinion about this. Do you think you have a role in not leading the energy, but in creating these different waves of energy in the group, of being more hyped or more calm, more grounded, more energetic? Do you think you want to, you have a role in this?
It depends. Don't we hate that answer? So my role is to hold a process, and if I am in the content, then I'm not serving the group as a system, and I sense the energy of the group is merely their content. It's embodied differently, it's expressed differently, but it's still their content. So for me, I'm not noticing the individual parts of that. I'm noticing how's that influencing the system present in front of me, the group, not necessarily the individuals. So my job isn't to dial in or out of sensing the energy for them, but for the group. So for me, I'm very conscious of, if I hold the process, and the process isn't the agenda, for me, the agenda should be their agenda in that moment, not the agenda they started with or where it is right now, but where they need to go. Then that energy that's emerging is just another content signal. It's just another data point. And if I dial in too hard into that, I don't serve the group, the organic system that stands in front of me.
Mm.
And in video environments, there's actually, to me, more evidence sometimes than it is in group face-to-face environments. You talked, Lily, about the feet kind of agitated under the bottom of the table or something like that. But for me, I'm always conscious to go, okay, what's the entirety of gallery view showing to me? And for me, the simplest thing is the ratio of cameras on to cameras off. So to me, I don't attach a label to each individual box. What I'm looking at is the gallery.
I'd like to draw some threads in this. I think the conversation about our energy levels is a really interesting one. And, you know, the dialing up and dialing down that you talked about, Lily. And I want to link that to this idea that you raised, Oscar, about it being a performance. I've often thought about the energy levels that we bring to our facilitation, and how does our energy level impact the group. And I liked, you know, the people familiar with the, you know, that's the story of Archimedes and the Archimedes principle, and that the bigger the volume in the bath, the more water is displaced, you know, that idea. And so it made me curious, because my experience in groups is when the facilitator is very big and the energy is very strong, that can serve to actually displace the energy of the group. And so people kind of retreat because the energy of the facilitator is quite strong. And you mentioned, Oscar, about how, you know, we're not going to be there tomorrow. So if we're not there tomorrow and the group's been pushed back to very small against the walls, what happens? So that notion of our energy and what space we create for the group, I think, is a really interesting one. How do we show up? How do we bring our energy in a way that is authentic to who we are? So some people are naturally energetic and, you know, loud, and some people are naturally softer and quieter. What does authenticity mean to you? And how do we show up and bring our energy in a way that is authentic to who we are?
I can start if you want. I've thought a lot about this this question of authenticity, and it was the podcast that we did together a couple of years ago. And I think the truest definition of authenticity right now for me is how am I authentic with myself, and then how do I put my all that I am at the service of the group. And it might mean for me being the person that I would naturally be in that group, with my unicorn and with I don't know, all my creativity. And sometimes it might mean checking in with myself, exploring how I'm feeling at that point, and also tuning in to what the group needs at that moment. Because I don't want to, I mean, I don't want to impose who I am on the group. I'm not there to do the Lily show. I'm not there to, I'm not there at a party with my friends. I'm just here to guide a process and to be of service to the group. And I think the way I can be authentic is just knowing how I'm feeling, and knowing what are my obstacles to being present, how I would like to show up, how I think I should feel I should show up, how my body feels, and then acting from there, but having this space of not reacting to the group, but being conscious of how I am. And this being said, one thing that really helps me be authentic is not facilitating alone, but facilitating with other people that have other skills, other kinds of energy, and with whom I can not always be this kind of schizophrenic person that I think I am at some points, between moments where I will be very energetic and moments where I'll be grounded, moments where I will be very focused on the process, and moments where I'll be more in meta. And co-facilitation is just such a relief to me, where I don't have to be all of the roles at the same times, but I can just be one thing at a time, one person at a time.
Thank you.
I think there are a lot of people in my head who want to facilitate. And the question is, which one is at play today, and is that character at service of the group? And if not, then I will just listen to that inner voice and have a discussion time with them, and then let the one who's at the service of the group come in.
I just want to acknowledge that Kate's unicorn cup just showed up in that conversation too. Did we see that?
I saw you, Kate, and I saw your unicorn cup.
Our inner unicorns. Oscar, authenticity, how do you work with that? What does that look like for you? We're going to buy you some green ears.
I raise your unicorn cup with one Yoda. 2015, I'm in a building that is between the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. So it's got this spectacular view of the harbour, working for a professional services firm. And the founders wanted it to start early at 7 a.m. And I said, look, yeah, I get that. Do you have people who have families? Yeah, we have people who have families, but it's only one person. It's the other co-founder. They'll turn up at 9 o'clock and they'll be fine. I'll catch them up, said the other founder. And a really productive meeting from 7 till 8:45. At 8:45, the other co-founder turned up and the room just turned into kindergarten. The conversations were being interrupted and cut off. And at 5 to 9, I just said, hey, time out. Something's changed in the last 10 minutes. I'm going to step out of the room and give you 5 minutes to decide if I'm the facilitator for this group, because I've gone from facilitating a bunch of adults to facilitating a bunch of school kids. I don't know what's changed. I'll let you choose. Don't pay me. I'm not attached to that. But right now, something's changed. So 9:30, I'm still sitting outside, and I've got laptops in there. I've got butcher paper. I got sound systems, all the stuff that we bring along. It's like, I'm not worried if I don't get paid, but I do want my stuff. And in my head, I'm making up all these stories. And 9:45, the two co-founders come in and go, "You're the only person who's pointed out the bleeding obvious to us. Can you just do a workshop with the two of us? Because we're the problem." And I said, "Only if you explain that to the group." And that became a really interesting conversation because they didn't want to. And I thought it was really important. So we negotiated for 15 minutes about the importance of what they were role modeling to the group. And we came back in and they explained what they had negotiated with me. And then I asked the group, "Do you think that's in service of this organization?" And the organization was about 1,000 employees. And there were about 13 people in the room besides the two founders. And they said no, they had gathered some courage in the absence of the two founders. And they said, "We're as much of the problem for allowing this behavior as they are for acting in that way." I said, "Okay, well, I'm happy to renegotiate an agenda, but we're going to spend at least an hour agreeing on what the agenda is." Now, I was honestly quite happy not to get paid. I did want to collect my stuff. But for me, in that moment, I was calling out what was just unprofessional. And to me, I kept scratching my head going, how can they have 1,000 people in the organization when the founders are like this? But as Lily might call them, the two co-facilitators of the organization. But if you care enough about the group, you'll tell them the truth.
I want to jump in with a question that I've been exploring with other people who lead groups. We've spent an hour and a half talking about this last Friday. When we lead a group, should we be neutral? Should we be non-influential? And I find your story amazing, and I would like to hear you, Oscar, on this topic of neutrality influence on groups.
Well, I think neutrality is BS. If you want neutrality, go and hire a robot. Go and get some machine learning AI thing. We're humans. Bring all of our humanity to the conversation, which includes our subjectivity. I could have been completely wrong in my decision there, Lily. And there are some places where neutrality has a really important role, and you need to notice when that's relevant. But I think we do ourselves a great disservice to think, this is often paralleled with, oh, how do I take the emotion out of the conversation? It's like, why? It's just data. Let's keep the emotion in there, whether that's exuberant emotion or other kinds of emotion. And yeah, you can not bring your whole self as a human and be neutral. That's my thesis, he said with much subjectivity. What do you think, Lily?
And what does the group think? I think this would be a fun one for others to dive into. And it links a little bit to the topic of, you know, where do we stand, or how are we present when we are challenged? You know, when we're taken to our edge, what is it that we draw on? What do others think? What questions do you have?
What comes to my mind is the distinction between the neutrality of us as humans, And I totally agree with Oscar. We are humans. We are not neutral. We have our biases. We have our opinions. And still, I think as a facilitator, to be in service of the group, I have the responsibility to stay neutral regarding the outcome. So for me, the neutrality of a facilitator is purely focused on the outcome, that I'm not attached to a certain outcome. And I think what you just described, Oscar, as you stepped out, and both options, you packing your stuff and leaving the group, or continuing to work with them, either with two or with all of them, for me is a great example of not being attached to the outcome, while not being neutral in terms of your humanity and your strong opinions of what's going on in this specific moment.
Other thoughts, questions, ponderings?
One of the points that started my reflection on this was, if an elephant comes into the room, metaphorically or or physically,
Or a unicorn.
or a unicorn, which would be amazing and fabulous, and that I would pray for.
Cue the cupcake.
Ooh, thank you. Do I mention it? Do I point it? Do I take the courage to point it? Do I create the space to point it? Or because the agenda has not been designed to, do I leave it be? And I had this discussion 2 weeks ago on a workshop that I was doing, and the theme of the workshop was is a method of how do you cultivate hope faced with the immensity of the ecological environmental crisis. And so the design of the workshop is 4 steps where you ground in gratitude, where you honor your pains, and then you take a new point of view and you go forth. So the aim of the workshop is really focused on environmental crisis. And when we discussed with the team, they had a huge conversation that was going on in their own crisis as a team, as a human team. Lots of people were leaving the company. The 2 co-directors were in parental leave, and then someone had to step in and take the role of director, and there was this really big crisis in the organization. And personally, I do not like to leave subjects on just here in the room, and nobody talks about it, and everyone knows it's there, but we hide our eyes and our mouths and our ears, and we just talk about something else because it's way too uncomfortable to speak about that. And we took an hour to discuss on, should we name this elephant in the room during the workshop? Is it the right time? Is it not the right time? And we agreed that it was not the right time at that moment. So I made this choice not to name the elephant in the room because I didn't have the authorization but I don't know how I would have reacted if it had happened on site and on D-Day. And I don't know if it was the right choice, because I don't know if they will discuss this in another workshop at another space, or if I was not brave enough to actually put the real topic on the table. And the workshop was great, and it was really useful, and I adapted it so that people had also some time for themselves. But I know that the most uncomfortable topic was not covered, so I was left with this.
So my process question, Lily, always is, we come to a section break, and I always use 10% of the time. It's like, it's fascinating what you haven't talked about. It's really fascinating what we haven't discussed so far. And someone will be courageous enough to speak up if you've created that environment there. And that's not to say what you did was not in service of the group. Like, you know how they go to these fancy golf places? I don't play golf, so that's probably why I do that. I don't even know how you do it. But we were at a lunch break, and the group was discussing that topic that you just talked about at the lunch break, in pairs, not as a group. And as I walked around, I could hear that topic. I came back into the room and I said, it was really fascinating going around the group and hearing what you were talking about at the break, because the topic you were all talking about individually isn't something we talked about before lunch. I wonder what that says about how we're communicating as a team. So I didn't make it about them or any individual or the topic itself. And then three people in, somebody just threw the hand grenade into the room, and they weren't going to fall on it. They wanted a big explosion. And they said, this is why we aren't moving forward. And about 20 minutes after this very energetic interaction, I just simply said, is our original agenda going to serve us, or what should we do with the balance of our time? And they reset the agenda on that topic only. So for me, it's always, how do I bring external perspectives to surface that, rather than kind of what haven't we talked about as we go around the room and look at individuals. Keep it at a thematic level rather than the content.
And I wonder how this is cultural. You know, we're in different cultures, you and and I know that in France we have this culture of the boss needs to say yes to things and agree to conversations before we get into conversations. And I wonder how sometimes I am biased by all the books that I read that come from the United Kingdom, the United States, from Australia, and I have this very English vision of facilitation, of let's go into uncomfortable conversations. And when I facilitate in France, maybe the cultural context is different.
Yet you felt that it needed to be discussed. Forget the cultural context and whatever you've read in that moment with your presence. If you were fully self-expressed in that moment, what choice would you make now based on your reflection?
I think I would discuss more the agenda with the whole team and not just 2 or 3 people. And this is why I made this choice, is I didn't have the whole group. And what is actually interesting is that they had the workshop that I was leading was optional, and that we didn't have the whole team. And if we had the whole team, something else would have happened. But it was really a very, very interesting moment for me to sense what I was feeling, what the 3 people that I was discussing with were very afraid of, and then how do I position myself?
What it's illustrating is a little bit too about the kind of the shape of things that we talked about in the Seedlings program. So we started off with, you know, getting clear about purpose and what the invitation is. And I think who we speak to about that, and who gives the mandate for the purpose of the session, that's super important. And the other thing it's reminding me about is the notion of what we model as facilitators, and how what we model influences and gives permission to the participants of the group. And the big example we've talked a lot about in the Seedlings program is vulnerability and humanity. And so I wonder whether it would be really nice to explore, what is it that you try and model in your presence? Well, that was interesting. Where did that come from? What is it that you seek to model? Yes. I often think about my Yoda self and what would my Yoda self say? What is it that we seek to model for the group in our presence that then gives them permission for their being to be explored in certain ways? So can I ask you both to comment on that? What is it in your presence, in the way that you show up, you are seeking to model for the group? The permissions you then are creating, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll definitely go first here, Lily. It won't take long. This is what I model to the group. Just being comfortable with silence. I've had people talk about that decades later. Over to you, Lily.
Being here, just arriving and taking the time to transition. And I don't always do what you do, Oscar, but I try to do it and try to model it and take the time to arrive. I check people, take a breath or two, and then let's go. And also taking breaks and authorizing myself to not always be in discussion with people, but taking a real break, taking a nap, eating what I need to eat, even if it's different from other people, and nourishing my whole self.
I'm wondering what questions and curiosities have arisen for those of you who have been listening. We've got a little bit of time left, and I wanted to give the opportunity for you to explore those, so that it's not just about the questions that I'm asking, but what are the things that you would like to know a bit more about or get a perspective on?
I guess I had a couple of thoughts when we talk about the concept of energy earlier and authenticity, and also what we model. All those things are very intertwined for me, because as a woman who operates typically within very male-dominated spaces, and an American who lives in Germany and often operates in German or Northern European context, my energy is my model, because I have, and I'll say why. So before I was officially doing this facilitation job, there were often times when I would be the only woman who actually was granted official space. And I realized very quickly that it was extremely important for me to take that space and to use my energy, which is typically about 30% higher than average in a Northern European or Central European setting. So that women who are typically younger, but not always, in my spaces saw what could be and saw what it could accomplish. And so I realized that modeling that in that setting was important. And then, so I bring that in as a facilitator, but always try to be cognizant of the fact that I am taking up, cognizant to not take up too much space as the person, as a facilitator. So I just wanted to bring up the fact that how much energy we're allowed is very also subjective. And that's a very intersectional question too. So yeah, So it's not really a question. I just kind of wanted to put that out.
A very rich and interesting observation, I would say, and that multi-layered of culture, of gender, of modeling, of power. There's lots going on there. Yeah. Others?
What I'd be curious about, and Michelle, you mentioned it as part of an earlier question, and we haven't touched it yet, and maybe it's just a topic for different conversation. When we train facilitation, it's about the doing and the activities, and rarely any facilitation training speaks about the presence and the being. So I would be curious, is it actually something that one can learn, one can train or teach, or is it purely the maturity that grows from being out there and getting it wrong so many times because we were not present and we missed all these moments, or we misinterpreted the sound of silence, and thereby grow that practice of presence?
I have a view, but I'd like to hear from the guests first.
What has actually helped me do this was not facilitation trainings, but retreats, conversations, coaching, and outside of work, moments where I've had the chance to practice how I am present without being in my professional role, and then going back into my professional role and bringing all of this into my facilitation role, and noticing what's happening, what defense is here, what character is there. And in France, I've seen more and more facilitation trainings incorporate this, the being dimension, presence, how we are as people rather than how we do, and it really is a joy. And I see when I do trainings and I bring this in, it really changes perspectives, and it creates this reincorporation of us as total human beings rather than Excel spreadsheets.
Oscar? I think you might have frozen. Are you with us, Oscar?
Or is he just practicing silence?
Yes, I do wonder. I'll jump in while we've got the hiccup. Because just by making sure that this was one of the topics in the Seedlings program, I guess that emphasis that it is something that we need to cultivate and think about. And I think that you can deepen self-awareness and support people to deepen self-awareness. So that's one of the things. And then you can refine your ability to then incorporate that self-awareness in the way that you work when you're in a room and you've got all the distractions of people and work and space going on around you. So I think it's the two things. It's actually building the self-awareness and then being able to harness that when you're actually in the room. And I think you can work on that, definitely. Now, it sounds like Oscar has had some technical glitches. So Miriam, did you have Miriam with the J? Did you have anything that you wanted to kind of focus in on or ponder before we wrap up a little bit?
I think I should change my name to the nickname MJ. I was previously known as MJ. That would help in this community. I'm feeling very satisfied with everything that's been discussed, because it really feels like a sort of a unison of many different aspects that are all connected. So I'm just sort of happily listening and reflecting, and I think I resonate with almost everything that's being said.
Thank you. By way of wrapping up, Lily, I wonder whether, just as a last comment, what is it, coming to Miriam's question, what is it that you think facilitators can focus on to support being present and being fully present in a group? What is it that you would like to kind of gift forward to other facilitators to cultivate in their facilitation practice?
For me, it's taking the time and transitions. Helping people feel like they're not compressed into the agenda, but that they have air and that they have time, and that they have the time to arrive, to settle in, to be present, to go on with the agenda, to adjust, even if it's a very small workshop. For me, it doesn't mean that we have to have 15-minute breaks every 30 minutes, but it's creating an agenda that is spacious enough so that there is the space for people to be present.
Thank you. Now let's turn that over to everyone else who's here. Now, when you think about this topic of presence, what is it that you want to cultivate more of in your own practice, in your own facilitation? What does it make you focus in on or reflect on? Just by way of closing, what would you bring more of into your own practice?
For me, it's slowing down and really connecting to my own needs and deciding what to do with them in the moment, and not only focusing on everything around me.
Thank you. Welcome back, Oscar.
Welcome back.
We're just doing as our closing question, what is it that people will focus more on now in their own practice when they think about this topic of presence? So thanks, Miriam. Others, what are you going to bring more of into your facilitation practice?
I actually think boundaries. It was something that I was thinking about this morning before our call anyway. Yeah. Especially when it comes to this presence. So can I be truly present when there's an alarm going off in the background? Anyway, can I truly be present if I haven't gotten myself straight on where my boundaries are in relationship to the people I'm facilitating with? So thank you.
To me, it's letting go of expectations and aspirations to be present with the group, and being present with my own courage and confidence of the gut feeling to speak into the room what is not said. I think that was a good reminder by Oscar. Thank you. And then trust that the right thing will emerge from. For me, the presence is really this groundness to hold the container and be present with whatever there is that wants to fill it.
Oscar, did you have something you wanted to offer as a focus for people moving forward?
No, just for me, it's just continue or dial up exercise in a practice the same way I treat any other professional practice. I've just got to dial up the exercise, probably 15% more, but for me, it's an important 15%.
Thank you, everybody. This is a special occasion. This is the last of the components of the Seedlings program, and thank you to all of you for your presence as part of the program. To Miriam for giving the space for this work to take place. So thank you very much for that happening. And to Lily and Oscar for your beautiful, gentle generosity in being here and being so flexible too with what happened with the time today. Yeah. Take care, everybody. Go really well into your day. And Miriam, what did you want to say?
I wanted to thank you for guiding us through the process and holding the space and asking curious questions and dig deeper on our behalf. Thank you. And thank you, Oscar and Lily.
Thank you,
and
Michelle.
Miriam and Kate.
Yeah, an absolute pleasure. Go well into the rest of your day or your evening. And we're all getting super excited about the testable in about 24 hours, isn't it? So come test. All right, take care and thank you. Thank you all very, very much for being here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.